First we created the brain, now we are creating the body. AI is set to get a body, a mechanical body, that will accompany us, will live beside us, breathe beside us, talk to us, just as we're speaking. The scientists that were already considered to be top performers, as soon as they got access to some of these AI tools, they became even better. So what this means is, as a matter of fact, that the gap between the best and the rest gets a whole lot bigger. Have you ever used dating advice or relationship advice of AI over a therapist or a trusted friend? And we found that about 1/3 has done it at least once. There is some emerging evidence using AI tools for some of our most critical decision making does decrease our own critical decision making ability. So the key issue here, particularly for the emotional use cases, is that
this week, Walter Pasquarelli. Have I got that right?
yes, correct.
Excellent. It was a pleasure to have you on. You're an incredibly distinguished speaker, expert, YouTuber as well, I believe. Give me a background to your past and experience and what's brought you here today in the world of AI.
Of course. Well, thank you first of all so much for having me. So I've spent approximately the last 10 years of my life working on artificial intelligence strategy and policy. I advise nowadays mostly heads of state, ministers, C-suites and boards of big and small companies on everything that relates to how can you get the most advantage out of this very powerful new technology. I started out initially working almost exclusively with government ministries across the world. So I developed one of the first tools that would allow countries and nations to compare themselves effectively on how they were faring, how they were performing essentially in the capabilities on artificial intelligence. Then I worked for a little bit at The Economist, and today I'm affiliated researcher at Cambridge University. I'm a member of the Strategic Advisory Board of the Welsh Government. I had also advised the OECD, and I've served also as an advisor for some of the large firms like the Googles, the Microsofts, the Metas, and a few other companies across various sectors of our economy.
What's your view of AI as it stands today? It's December 2025, and I mentioned the date because every month this seems to be such a rapidly changing story that if we said December 2024, 2023, it's almost like a different universe.
It is, and I mean it's also changed fundamentally from when I started. I mean, when I first started working in the field of artificial intelligence, it was really, if anything, a discipline that was really centered within niche pockets of business and society. So you would have maybe some companies that were experimenting with back then some deep learning algorithms that were kind of like trying to predict how many bottles of whatever drink they were selling for the next year, maybe also some more complex calculations. And then you would have almost like a whole different niche of people that would be working within policy, maybe within philosophy, maybe within social studies that would try and understand what could be the impacts of these kinds of technologies on society today and maybe tomorrow. Perhaps one of the things that's worth mentioning is that the way it has accelerated, both in terms of its capability, but also in terms of how it has captured the public's imagination, is something that the majority of us didn't really expect. So obviously there was the launch of ChatGPT that happened 2 weeks ago. I think it turned 3 years old. But that really launched the public and economists and people who work directly in the field almost overnight into a whole new era. Now, it's quite easy, I think, for us to get almost like used to the pace of technological progress. I mean, I think the first time these kinds of generative technologies came out, everyone was like, oh, this is magic. This is something we've never seen before. But even since then, the pace of development and the sophistication of the intelligence if we can call it like that, of the calculations, the predictions, the outputs that it can produce has even then increased dramatically. But for us, we're kind of getting used to it to some extent. Think of it in terms of either making calculations or producing texts, or some people using it increasingly also for personal advice, but also things like images, videos, voices that we can now recreate almost from scratch, where we can no longer tell the difference between what is real and what is synthetic. I think that from now on, there's going to be increasingly an adoption that will happen, perhaps not even just like from enterprises. I think the conversation has really focused so much on businesses, on governments. But I think what we're seeing nowadays emerge, particularly over this past year, has really been ordinary people, ordinary citizens, trying to experiment with these technologies and finding use cases that match their own personal preferences. So there is probably going to be a reckoning at some point, in the sense that we're going to ask ourselves, to what extent have we integrated this into our lives? To what extent are we still capable of living without it? We might have already passed that point, but I think in the meantime, we will see the development of artificial intelligence advance just as fast, if not faster, over the next few years.
Where would you see AI being, and we'll keep it short term, although in this world it's long term, December 2026?
So I think that we can almost like categorize the development of artificial intelligence at the moment in 3 different trajectories. A lot of the reports that we see out there, especially in business contexts, are advancements in intelligence in absolute terms. So think of essentially, now we're at GPT 5.1, and then we'll get to GPT 6, GPT 7. So tools that are able to produce outputs that are effectively smarter, more accurate, that decrease in hallucinations, that can absorb more data and have a better memory function, so they can remember things that maybe we fed them years ago. But I think the really overlooked area, the second stream, are artificial intelligence systems that are more interactive. So some that are not only used by organizations, but that are used by ordinary people. And here we're talking about systems that are being used for advisors on our personal matters. People use them in their dating life, people to use them to bounce off ideas, maybe for creative work, people that even use them for ensuring that maybe they have something or someone to talk to when maybe they cannot afford any therapy. And this year we've really seen a rapid increase, particularly in that field. There was a Harvard Business Review study that came out a few months ago that said that the number one use case for Gen AI nowadays is companionship and therapy. So that's a stream that I think we've kind of overlooked, I would say. Mm-hmm. But perhaps by December 2026, there is another field where I believe will be one of the largest, most significant transformations that is yet to come. And that is, of course, in the field of robotics and in humanoids. So first, we created the brain. Now we are creating the body. And while for now, we've always interacted with these systems, typically via our screen, maybe via our phones, maybe via our laptops, AI is set to get a body, a mechanical body, that will accompany us, will live beside us, breathe beside us, talk to us, just as we're speaking to each other right now.
That makes me think of a whole different range of things. So let me put some thoughts to you. So, and I would completely agree. The mechanical side, the robotic side is definitely coming. But I'm looking at 2 different types of, or 2 different methodologies of technology. So if we said private, so edge-based, and then cloud-based.
Yeah.
And you mentioned we've effectively come up with a mind. Is it an independent mind, or is there going to be an evolution to more of a swarm mind, or an interconnected mind, where there's individual capabilities, but those capabilities are part of a bigger solution? So especially in business, one of the big problems that has been there for many, many years, and probably governments too, is disparate systems and lots of different disparate systems that don't necessarily communicate with each other
Yeah.
and don't communicate with particular stakeholders. And it seems that a lot of the technology we have now is what I would consider a one-to-one AI. Even the co-pilots tend to be human with AI, but an enterprise would work on information across an organization, a government, probably the same sort of thing. So will there be a further definition and refinement of the different functionality and where that sits within systems, so to speak?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and you are right. As a matter of fact, the way that we have used AI nowadays has been through these foundation models. It can be the GPTs, the Llamas, or Claude, or Gemini from Google. And there are ways for organizations to have a model that they can integrate within their firm that is proprietary. So that means it could be, for instance, air gapped, so that if I have some confidential data about myself or about clients, if I put it in there, at least in theory, it should be safe and a little bit more protected from any kinds of privacy breaches. At the very least, it would mean that the data is not uploaded to train the model. Now, there's a few issues that people are encountering nowadays when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence and some of these tools across organizations. One of that is that, as you just stated, typically it's like AI to human. And I might have an account, maybe my organization has an account, I put in my data, but we don't really have what is called a unified memory layer. And a unified memory layer is almost like an organizational memory that allows us as multiple colleagues, as multiple people, to work together on a project and effectively share the same insights that this kind of model has. We can kind of fine tune them. We can adjust them based on by embedding some proprietary data sets that we have as organizations. But the sort of like centralized model where you and I could work together on it, that's not really a given yet. Now, there are a few options, and I think what you've just described as well with the cloud-based infrastructure at the moment still seems to be the dominant form of AI development and AI use. As we will approach a further spread of AI usage, particularly integrated into new hardware, they're obviously like AI on the edge, and the computation that happens directly on devices is something that could be particularly helpful for allowing us to, on the one hand, meet the computational requirements directly on site, but also help us bridge, for instance, things like energy shortages that are used for these enormous computational facilities. So there is definitely a case where we could see the cloud certainly not replaced by any means, but as the changes happen and the spread happens more on site through decentralized AI systems, that is something that seems for sure very promising.
Because if we flip now to the personal side, so you've been working on research which is not out just yet, but what can you allude to? Because from our discussions, it's been very, very fascinating looking at the geotemporal sort of, or the geographic in this context, geographic differences, and the societal driver of how people are using things personally, which then obviously leads to the privacy element. I mean, we're seeing behavioral changes that probably couldn't have been predicted 3 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that latches very nicely precisely in the point that we just discussed about the shift from sort of purely enterprise centralized AI systems to the ones that are increasingly used more in households, perhaps in our living rooms, in our bedrooms as well. And I always felt that in the past years, whenever we asked someone, do you use AI for A, B, or C, be it in professional environments or personal uses, it was almost like a bit of a dirty little secret that people had, that most people were not really willing to admit or discuss when they were using AI tools for either for say creating anything they would use at work, or maybe creating any creative outputs, or let alone personal uses. That's an area called shadow AI. So the
Unauthorized AI in some circumstances. I've heard it described a few things, but shadow AI is the best version of how
exactly. And it's very difficult to assess quantitatively as well, because people, when they are asked by their employers or by their bosses to use AI for this and this and this, when they are prohibited to use some of these tools for particular tasks, and then they have to go and admit it, nobody's probably going to do that. But in addition to that, there's almost a bit of a social desirability perspective that adds to that difficulty in assessing it. So I was very curious to understand it a few months ago, to really see to what extent are really people using AI for not only their professional tasks, but for their most personal areas and most personal questions in their lives. So I conducted a survey with about 1,500 people across the UK and the US, and we started asking them questions, such as, for example, to what extent have you relied on AI companions for making critical decisions across, for instance, your health, about the political information that you get, potentially about relationship advice, sort of dating, psychological advice, as well as financial advice. And the numbers that we had were, at the very least, very surprising, that I personally underestimated. Across all of these disciplines, so when it comes to relationship advice, your mental health, financial, and so on and so forth, the numbers that we had is that for 1,500 people across America and the UK, across all age brackets, about 60 to 70% use AI for some of these, for making decisions in these particular areas. Now, the next question, when it comes to assessing these kinds of questions, is, of course, to what extent do you use AI over human expertise? So we asked, have you ever used AI, and if so, how many times, for health advice over a doctor? Have you ever used AI companions for financial advice over your maybe accountant or your investor? Have you ever used dating advice or relationship advice of AI over a therapist or a trusted friend? And we found that about 1/3 has done it at least once over the past 3 months. And about 5 to 10% typically do it regularly. And we define regularly between 5 and 10 times over the past 3 months. Every time basically a question like that arises. So that is a major transition, a major shift perhaps even in how we define and to what we describe expertise and critically authority, that is happening right in front of us, and that has so far not been quantified in a way that is at least statistically significant. Now, there are a couple of other interesting things that we can find there, and particularly for people that are between 25 and 34 years old, so people that are in transitional periods of their life. So think of 25-year-olds, typically, they come out of university, they might move to a large city like London or New York or Berlin, and they have to define everything about who they want to become as they become adults. And that's also a time in their lives where maybe they meet their spouses, or maybe they start dating and they go in it with more intention, and maybe they feel emotionally more vulnerable. And there we had nearly 8% of that age group, so 25 to 34 years old, reported that they rely on AI for their own emotional lives. So that sounds maybe not like a lot, 8%, but once you scale it,
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. So if you would apply this to, let's say, 1 million people of that age bracket, that's a lot.
I mean, also, if we looked at, I was hearing something on this earlier, people graduating from university, fitting within that age bracket, lawyers, law firms not really bringing on junior lawyers, using AI instead. That as an example, again, scaled across many different industries. That age group effectively leveraging the thing which is taking their opportunity away. If all AI in the large language models is based upon historical data,
Yeah.
and we're looking at a circumstance which has never been historically described, and people are engaging
Yeah.
on a problem which is, as of now, inevitable to end up in a completely different socioeconomic function, so to speak, because it's societal. It goes back to the idea of, will AI take your jobs? I think,
Basically,
well,
yeah.
jobs, they're not all equal. So, will it replace plumbers' jobs? Not in the near future. Will it replace graduates going into law firms? Probably. There's all these different elements colliding simultaneously at the same time.
With the fact that people enjoy using these tools, and with the fact that there's also studies that show that people who use AI in the work environments, particularly for some more repetitive tasks, actually report a higher work satisfaction. So there's really a desire among many people to be able to make use of such systems. Now, to add to the point about the historical data that is used for training the foundation models is also the fact that what happens when everyone starts using the same models, right? I mean, the majority of people, young professionals, they would rely on either ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude in the majority of cases. And those numbers usually fluctuate. ChatGPT has been the front runner so far, but it's declining. Gemini is now catching up. Coders really like using Claude. So it really depends. But as a matter of fact, there's always the same tools. So what happens? From all the evidence that we have, is that people who rely on outputs using AI that they use for their work, they're not all the same, but they are essentially differentiated based on the human excellence that they bring. Let me give you an example. There's been a study from, I believe it was material scientists, that were basically measuring among a variety of different scientists that were categorized and considered excellent, top performers, medium performers, average performers. And the scientists that were already considered to be top performers, as soon as they got access to some of these AI tools, they became even better. But the ones that were just average performers, they stayed at about roughly the same level of performance. So what this means is, as a matter of fact, that the gap between the best and the rest gets a whole lot bigger. And we see this across many other industries, one of them being, for instance, for investment professionals, where you could really measure who are the ones that make the best predictions on the market, which stock is going to go up. And even there, the top performers had a performance increase of about 10%. Average performers, I think it was something around 2%. Even in creative industries, we see that there is an amplification that takes place for people that have already cultivated that human kind of excellence, and that really that taste, that judgment, that ability to curate and select the right outputs, because they have the human knowledge and the human capability based on that. And so, if anything, to me, what that means on the question of will AI take your job or not, we can certainly make a relatively confident conclusion that, especially for the bottom rungs of firms, I think it would be far-fetched to say that all entry-level jobs are going to be gone. I think that's at least for now not what our data indicates, but what we can say is that there's, on the one hand, going to be more competition, because if you are a very good paralegal, or if you're a very good junior finance professional, or a very good junior creative, you can probably produce a lot more and a lot faster and at a much higher quality. So there's, if anything, there's going to be a bit of a bottleneck of vacancies. But the other thing is that that if you curate and if you really accelerate and cultivate that human excellence that you would need anyways, then those systems can help you become better than you already were.
So in effect, and it's something we share and believe as well, subject matter expertise as one has probably more value than ever. Scale, the ability to scale very, very good human-driven expertise on a kind of horizontal scaling basis. So someone who knows what they're doing could replicate, augment their capability.
Yeah,
So it's an enhancement and it's a scaling of the ability to deliver consistently good results, but on a much wider basis. Talent itself, I mean, it makes perfect sense from a creative industry standpoint. When you know how to produce music, you realize there's the instinctive element, and then there's the ritual side of knowing why something works and why something doesn't work, the point and purpose of what you're trying to achieve. And if you don't understand all those base fundamentals, you're probably going to instruct AI to do something without knowing why. So actually, it's the rate limiting factor is the individual at the beginning, because a good producer pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes and doesn't accept certain things,
exactly.
and will often do things that technically are not correct. But if it works, if something works and you can recognize it works and you can get all these things in combination, you can break all the rules and do something that no one else can. And people say, oh, how did you do that? Well, it's the net result of a whole process. Same as film. If you're a great director, you know what shot you're looking for. You're seeing it in your mind beforehand. The rate limiting factor is usually the budget to have other experts around, such as a cinematographer who understands the vision. So it's how you communicate. It's what you're looking to achieve, what mood and emotion, how you direct the actors. There are so many nuanced skills, which is it's reading the room. It's how you observe people. It's not the documented approach. It's the individual in instinct, and then the ability to execute. And what AI, I think personally, can do in the creative industries, it can allow people that instinctively and from an experience standpoint, given we're talking two different types here,
Yeah,
people that are new to it, so that's going to be talent and inspiration, to make the mistakes quickly, to experiment and to know what good looks like and know how to leverage AI, where probably before the barrier to entry is, well, they didn't have the opportunity for the resources. So suddenly you skip the resourcing element, you can get straight into doing and executing and finding out what works
and creating.
and creating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from the subject matter expertise standpoint, it's everything that is not said that is a culmination of decades worth of experience
Yeah.
to know the right question first time.
Yeah. Well, I 100% agree. And I think, as you stated, I think the novelty in for instance, like creative work, but also in like research, in even like financial models, you could apply it. But really, I think creative work is really a nice example here, because the best work is the one that is outside the existing mental models.
Yeah.
Right. That's why people might find it weird the first time they listen to a song that is new and that is truly like I've never heard that before.
Well, I want to elaborate on that because that's a really fascinating point. And I've tried this as an experiment before. If you get a particular track that could have been done by a famous artist, but you don't say, and you get the same track, label it someone famous, and one would be considered good, the other, it's all right. The other route would be, if I know you well and trust you and you recommend a song, automatically I'm going to think that's a cool song. if someone I don't know has said that's a good song and I think they're an idiot, I'll probably not like the song. So that's the other side. Then the rule of 7. You've got to have heard it 7 times. Well, in reality, first time you'll ignore it. Second time, so you get up to 5 times before it's familiar, and 7 times before you actually pay attention. Same as the rules of marketing.
Interesting.
If you add all these things together, the reason a song will be liked is because you don't want to be the person in your peer group, in your social circle, that doesn't like something that you can see everyone else likes. So there's a social acceptance element.
Yeah.
There's the familiarity element, which effectively breeds trust in the end. And there's the source at which you discover that information as well.
Yeah. And then the 7th time, if you don't know, you might find yourself anywhere, in a bar, in a coffee shop, listening to it then, and then finding yourself Shazamming it, because that's the moment where it really hits you, and you get used to it, and your brain accepts it.
And it's also the context experience. For example, when you're at university, when you're growing up, think of the songs in the summertime.
Yeah, exactly.
You can probably remember, we can all remember our lives at certain times, and you go, oh, I was at this place and it was beautiful sunny weather and I was with my friends, we're having a great time. So the soundtrack is almost planted into the emotional setting in which you experienced it, probably on a repeat basis for a period of time that you look fondly back upon in your life.
Yeah.
That's why everyone always thinks the best music ever was probably the music they heard between 16 and 23.
All right.
Doesn't matter what age. For older people, it'll be the Stones. Other people would be the Beatles. Other people would be Ed Sheeran. Other people would be, you could name it with nuances.
Yeah.
But effectively, like the Summer of '69, that Bryan Adams.
Bryan Adams, yeah.
Right. Even when, I remember when Philadelphia, Bruce Springsteen came out.
Yeah.
And where I was and who my friends were. And there's always these little nuances. But am I remembering the song?
Or the moment?
Or my memories of that time and the people around?
Yeah.
AI is going to be a really interesting one, because if we look at the emotional support side, is that going to get in 10, 20 years' time, people look back and some of those moments have been then captured by
an AI system? That's fascinating. And yeah, for sure. I mean, if we look at all the types of questions and types of answers that people used to provided me with when it came down to describing a situation in which they used AI, I mean, some of them use it in, some of them bring some baggage. So some of them might have gone through trauma. They might not have a person to rely on, and for that reason, the AI companion becomes not only a tool to bounce off ideas or to consult when there's an issue, but it becomes the reference point over anyone, also because maybe nobody else is available. In other cases, we find people, especially younger ones, that say, I think one of our respondents said there was a storm outside and I was really scared, and I started speaking to one of my AI companions, and it calmed me down and made me feel a lot better. And that's how I sort of started using it more often. And then there's sort of the average user, and they kind of slip in quietly, and they almost go down like a whole rabbit hole until they end up where they are, where most people are today, which is they might start out with an email, maybe an email from or to their boss, and they're like, is this the right tone? I need to copy, edit that. Then at some point they realize this can not only help me correct my grammar and my spelling, but this can help me change the tone. At some point, maybe they have an argument with their friend and they upload the screenshots in it. They find, oh, this worked very well for this time. But then they start using it more regularly. And perhaps one of the key things as well is if we look at, as you just described, the long term, is that there is some emerging evidence that using AI tools for some of our most critical decision making does decrease our own critical decision-making ability, because ultimately the brain is a muscle. And if we don't train it, then like our muscles, when someone doesn't go into the gym, then it kind of atrophies. So the key issue here, particularly for the emotional use cases, is that the more you use it, the more you will need it.
Yes. Do you think that's in any way intentional? I mean, that's maybe a bit conspiratorial, but or could it just be a negative consequence? Because I do find it deeply concerning.
Yeah, so I do think there is a bit of nuance here that I always like to add, especially when it comes to the mental health impact. So like I saw with social media, which has been ultimately, in my opinion, a technology that has been designed to be addictive, designed to keep you on it with the red buttons that keep you alert and the reels that stimulate your dopamine. I think there is a real case to be made that, especially that nowadays that some of these AI firms face investor pressure, and there's talks about AI bubbles and whether it's going to pay off and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of a bit beside the point, that they might want to design them in ways that are more addictive. One of them is the classic example, which is with X-rated content. And there was the announcement by OpenAI that they said that they're going to allow explicit messaging, so X-rated content, and these kinds of conversations as well to be included as part of ChatGPT. That is a whole new area. So basically X-rated AI companions, they already make up nowadays, according to our research, about 50% of all the traffic that online fans have in 3 years. So it feels a bit like, oh, it's really? Yes. We have some numbers, we have some data from website traffic that we audited, and the numbers are very clear. The growth trajectory is very clear. Similar like pornography made the internet widespread. There is a case to be made as well that that these same kinds of contents and industries might make AI widespread. Now, as with every technology, it's never black and white. And when it comes to, for instance, the mental health impacts, there is some real good evidence from studies, empirical studies, that has been conducted that shows how some of these AI tools can reduce some cases of loneliness, can allow people to go back into the real world and connect with people, especially once they feel isolated. So I might feel isolated, I can practice with an AI companion, and that allows me then to potentially reduce some social anxiety and go out. There's also cases, particularly for people within conflict zones and conflict areas. So there was a study conducted for people who were living in Ukraine that had access to some of these tools, and it did help them go through very difficult periods and very difficult situations by having at least something that they could effectively bounce off some ideas and use as almost like an outlet. But perhaps if, like, as all of our studies show, and I think that's the pattern that we've seen also in some of the other points that we've just made today, is that the best results is when you combine a therapist with an AI tool, because the therapist can provide the depth, it can think outside of the model, as we said earlier,
and also observe.
Exactly.
That's a key thing. We were talking before we began about body language.
Yeah.
And I think the singular mode of any AI has limited utility in wider contexts. So if you ask them, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine."
Yeah, I can tell you're not fine then, right?
The inference and the body language,
exactly,
eye contact or lack of eye contact.
Yeah.
It's difficult because you could look at the negative side. A good example, I see CVs coming through and they all are written brilliantly. So I don't believe any of them.
Yeah.
Because I'm automatically thinking, they've used ChatGPT. What are they actually like?
Yeah.
Now, when you're actually with someone in person, and I think there's going to be this what's real, what you can actually experience, and what you can trust is going to become really important. Everything else is going to be highly competent. same with generative video. If everything is so photorealistic that you can't tell the difference,
Yeah.
then the assumption is, okay, yes, it's impressive, but it is what it is. I need authenticity. I need something real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in the case of human to human interaction, it's a lot of the times it's like the micro expressions, right? So those things that I don't even perceive
Yeah.
when I look at you and you say, yeah, I'm fine, but I can kind of tell from unconsciously or subconsciously that there's something happening that tells me someone is actually not fine. I should maybe dig deeper or ask, right? In other cases, like in music, I mean, there's cases like what the Baby Shambles that used to play, or other indie rock bands that had guitars that were not perfectly tuned, right? And you would think from a theoretical point of view, well, this shouldn't work, but there's something about it that makes, in that particular context, makes it feel wonderful and perfect. If you were to do it when if you're listening to a Verdi opera and the strings were not tuned, you'll be like, this is horrible. So it's about the context and those imperfections, the thinking again outside the model or mental models, the foundation models from a technological point of view, that creates that novelty that might feel initially uncomfortable, but then over time we cannot get enough of.
But it is that imperfection. I mean, the idea of beauty, of
Exactly.
creativity
Yeah.
and art. It could be a scar. It could be something which tells a story.
Yeah.
It's the character. It's the thing that is beautiful about it. Perfection is too scientifically flat.
Statistical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is in many ways my concern. Well, it's a confusing time in the sense that for everything that you put forward, you can see something bad and you can see something good. It's usually all grey area. It's neither black nor white. And as you say, augmenting a human therapist with an AI therapist probably has, when shown statistically, has a lot more value. Only one extremity or the other is probably bad. And we're in a world now where new capabilities, new behaviors are being found. And yeah, having spent time in war zones and spent time with people who've had their families destroyed, sometimes even killed, that's a completely different context to someone living in a very well-to-do area with massive amounts of privilege. So the same thing could have an incredibly positive impact in one context and a potentially horrific context in impact in a different context. So it's almost, how do we rapidly observe common sense and extrapolate meaning from it, which can then be actionable? And going back to what you've been doing, advising governments and organizations, I've noticed people are making things so empirically simple, and it's not that simple.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the key thing, I always say, perfection is captured in moments, in instances. To bring perfection can be deeply imperfect as well, right? Like a cheap bottle of wine that I share with a friend of mine when we're stranded somewhere and we're having a great time and a great conversation. And if you were looking at it from the outside, you would be like, this is a horrible situation. But but extending this and sort of trying to calculate this statistically is not something that is, in my opinion, either achievable or desirable. Because then it means that if everything can be made perfect, then nothing is perfect. Yeah. And my favorite example is when it comes to understanding the future of work, in particular with artificial intelligence, is the producer Rick Rubin. So he says, and I think I saw an interview with him where he spoke with, I think it was Anderson Cooper from CNN, where he said, I don't play any instrument. I've zero technical ability. So he's being asked, oh, well, what do you get paid for? And he says, it's the confidence that I have in my taste and my ability to express it. So he has access to the best guitar players, the best singers, the best pianists, everything. But he's still the one who says, play this riff, play this one. This one is good. This one is not good. And it's not about how complex or how fast they play.
It's instinct.
It's instinct. It's taste. It's selection. It's judgment. And that comes from it because I think, as you said earlier, like for instance, the subject matter expertise, even if we were to look at all these studies from the investor, the creative, the material scientist, what distinguishes the top performers from the average performers that use AI is that you could technically have like an unlimited amount of outputs, 1,000, 10,000, depending on how many you ask it for, right? But there still needs to be someone who says, this one. In the same way that if I get an electrician coming to my flat and he turns around one screw when there's some electricity problems in my place, and then he charges me £400 for that. And I'm like, wait, you were here for 3 minutes. It's not the fact that he was there for 3 minutes. It's that he knows which screw he has to turn so that my flat doesn't get blown up or whatever happens. But that's the experience. That's a selection out of many outputs, picking the right one. And I think with artificial intelligence, it's going to be to some extent similar. There's also the other point, obviously, about providing novelty. And we provide that novelty through our own experience that we cannot get from simple models that are out there. And with organizations and firms, I think when I speak to a C-suite or to a government or to a minister, what they can produce and what they can provide are the ground conditions, the infrastructure, the tools, if we want, that then people can take and go out and produce things that can benefit society, their firms, or themselves personally.
That also leads to another point, which I think is one why we do this podcast, and you're a clear contributor, which is educating. Educating on the basis that we don't have to be AI subject matter experts to understand how AI will affect our lives, our jobs, our businesses, and the things that we love. I mean, it's now reaching deeply everywhere, and to have enough of an understanding to contextualize. One, actually, we do have value with our experience and how we think, and we understand what consequence the adoption of AI in particular walks of life can have. And it's not all AI is going to take your jobs, the world's going to end, and it's also not, it's going to make everything perfect. They're capabilities that, as you said, if you have the right attitude, the right mindset, then you can see opportunity where others will see threat.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's, again, the part of that is the fear of novelties that we have, right? And I think when it comes to welcoming something that is so new and so powerful and that is so shiny as well and so hyped up, let's be honest about that as well, then if I may be someone who sees 10 different headlines about how my livelihood is threatened, then obviously I'll be worried, and I understand that, and I empathize with that as well. Realistically, I think there is always a need for us to be able to adapt anytime in our careers. So we have to keep learning, and I think it's desirable for us to keep learning, and it's also desirable for us to feel some level of discomfort in any area of our lives, because that brings us that upgrades us realistically, right? In anything. But that said, I think there is a necessity as well, I think, as you just said, to educate people about what we see on the field, what we see from evidence that is emerging from credible studies and credible sources that allow us to draw conclusions that cannot help us make predictions, because every prediction we make in AI is usually wrong. But that can at least give us a taste of where the next 6 to 12 months are. And once we have that snapshot, then we can go out and talk to people. Now, about the point about AI expertise, it's always really tricky, because on the one hand, it has, as I mentioned earlier, really captured people's attention. So now everyone's going into it, and I think it's good as well that I think we're getting engaged. But there is also the point that it develops so fast that it's nearly impossible for anyone to keep up with it. Like when I try and produce a research paper, or say the classic example is actually more like a keynote. So in one of my keynotes, sometimes I'm being asked to provide the slide deck of the presentation a week or two in advance. You would think, oh, that's ample time. But I always say as a caveat, let's wait a bit longer because there's probably going to be new evidence emerging.
Yeah.
3-4 days before that you want to include to be able to provide something that is truly novel and truly cutting edge, right? And another example is I was part of a government advisory group for a European government, and we had the special situations group on there. And so it was like an advisory group where they brought together experts. And that group used to look about 20 years into the future to be able to make predictions about what is going to happen, how should we prepare policymakers, what is basically on the horizon. That was up until December 1st of 2022. And that special situations group then was shortened from 20 years to 5 years. And now it's basically like looking at what's the new big topic.
Yeah.
And what should we discuss? Because it's so difficult to accurately predict whether it's about the future of the economy, whether it's about threats. We can think of it to some extent by looking at the past, by looking at other technologies. But I'm personally very skeptical of people who say, oh yeah, because no new all technologies, they all created more jobs. For that very reason, artificial intelligence is going to do the exact same thing. To me, that's nonsense. Because it's about the past. It's about something different.
Yeah.
You can get the patterns, but we cannot get the certainty.
Yeah. Even if you looked at the day before DeepSeek launched and the day after,
Yeah.
and you look at the direct implications, first off, it was possible to do something at a fraction of the cost. Probably still cost more than they say, but it was still much, much cheaper to create a better output, which did immediately call into the question, is the amount of compute power actually needed? Now, if you then look at historical evidence, and the famous one, the Apollo spacecraft, and the compute power on that to then go to the moon, and then you look at the compute power and the price of it, which we hold in our hands in our iPhones, it's astronomical. So all evidence shows capability goes up, price comes down.
Yeah.
But economies' futures are now dependent on massive data centers. And vast amounts of money have gone into the assumption that the cost of training foundational models is X. And then in this one little thing, it put doubt into, well, the entire premise was not necessarily true. And I think we'll see a lot of changes and a lot of these days which will come to the fore. So how could you possibly plan more than 6 months to a year ahead?
Yeah, and you can't. No. I think the with the data centers, I mean, I from the conversations I've been having with people that both work within compute infrastructures as well as investors, computing power, we've always been short of it. Even in the 90s, there was always the issue, we need more compute power, we need more compute power. But I think even if you were to look at the cost of megabytes and RAMs that was needed for the internet or for telecommunications, even that has also gone down, even though in the early beginnings of the .com boom, it was astronomical as well, right?
Although the price of RAM has recently gone up.
It's gone up again, yeah. It's gone up again, that's true. There is a bit of a few assumptions as far as the compute infrastructure are being made. The number one thing, and I would probably agree with that, is the fact that the way we're using AI nowadays is not how we're going to use it in 5 years' time. And that means that nowadays we use it mostly on our laptops, maybe on our phones. That's it. What are the models that you use? Again, GPT, Gemini, Claude, That sort of, so it would seem odd. Why would we need that much more? And the change here is obviously the integration of AI into hardware on the one hand, in the sense, again, humanoids, drones critically, potentially some gadgets that we have. I think OpenAI announced that they were working now as well on their,
Johnny Ive.
yeah, exactly, on their new tool. So that might mean that this is going to create another whole wave of something that we just don't know whether it's going to be some smart glasses or a little pin or whatever it might be. So there's another big wave of potential compute power needed in addition to everything that already exists. Now, the thing gets a bit complicated when we understand the fact that it's not really like, say, the railways, where like when the railway bubble burst, we still had all the railways that we have today, and which is to a large extent, we even still use them. And the issue with that is that we will have probably developed a knowledge infrastructure, but with a lot of these data centers and computational infrastructure, the chips will get outdated.
I was wondering about that,
Yeah.
because I mean, I would have thought it was quite obvious that rate of innovation, spending vast amounts of money and saying, well, we've just bought tons and tons of these chips.
Yeah.
Chips do go out of date. There's always newer ways, and with such a demand as well.
Or entirely new innovations.
Yeah,
Right.
even with quantum computing
Exactly. Yeah.
on the horizon.
Yeah.
That would just make all of that redundant in a heartbeat.
I wouldn't say it makes it fully redundant. It just means that effectively we can make a case that there's overspending. But again, we don't know, because there's a whole backbone still needed for innovations that are still to come. I mean, people think that AI is going to be, what we mean with AI is chatbots, and it's not.
Yeah, I think that's on the decline.
It is what it's there. It's there. We use it for professional environments, for our personal matters, and so, but it's there. We might use it in commercials and films and marketing, and it's probably gonna be kept using as they become better as well, which does require computational power to train the models at this stage of development, or with this technical architecture, model architecture. But that's just the standard status quo of use. The real waves are still yet to come. The real uses are not there yet.
But that also comes into play, generalized versus specific.
Yeah.
We've been sold generalized, which has its issues. Even as you were referring to earlier, if everyone's using the same generalized, then the litmus test, the basis is the generic. And of course, the computational cost is vast if you're putting huge amounts of information in, but specific is usually far, far, far more performant. Business use cases will probably be specific because they have a specific function. Specific is a fraction to train, probably better results. And at the end of the day, the adoption of AI in business is going to be ROI based. And also we can get much better results. We've got the privacy of our own data. Then it becomes their internal infrastructure. And then it flips from old IT departments with on-prem to cloud. And we're already seeing back to on-prem. So it's like we've skipped a generation of expertise, and now the people that were deemed irrelevant now have this relevance as almost an antidote to an overshoot to the other side. It's almost like in everything in life, you go from one extreme to the other extreme, and this bounce back in political left to right, and old school, on-prem, cloud, back to something else for potentially different reasons.
Yeah.
But it's that would have a direct implication on the amount of money or where the amount of money is being spent. Because at the moment, if massive amounts of money has gone into huge generalized models, then is it not logical that companies doing that are going to sell what they're selling as opposed to what could work? Because
yeah, and that's the sort of I'll say there's a few layers there. So there is obviously like the whole Elon Musk's Colossus projects, which want to build 1 million GPUs. Sort of let's throw more data, more compute power, and we'll kind of advance even further. We'll reach AGI, basically. That's sort of the one way that the one stream of thought. Um, there's a lot of other people who say that the foundation models, the LLMs, specifically the large language models, as an architecture is quite it's not going to be the dominant model architecture of the future. In part due to the complexity of the calculations they can make, meaning the degree of, let's call it, intelligence, in part because of efficiency, and so on and so forth. The other thing is, and I don't have the exact number in front of me right now, but it's the fact that if we look at, for instance, the use of GPT-4, it was on that study, we use just a fraction of its capabilities, especially if I'm an individual user or I'm an individual professional. It's a tiny percentage of what the full capabilities of the models that we actually use. So there is, in fact, as I think you've just described, a trend, especially within enterprises, that use smaller models rather than the ginormous models that are sort of being developed, the standard, more standard ones that are being integrated into AI, into enterprises that seem to be very successful and have very positive feedback from everything that I've heard on that. Now, when it comes to, for instance, developing the AGI, whether that's in physical form or in digital form, we just don't know yet. So it might be that if I have a humanoid that works at home, a smaller model might be better. It might be that maybe I find use cases for this humanoid that I haven't fully figured out yet, and in which case a larger model might be better. So that's still something that we're still coming to grips with, and that we're still understanding as it develops.
But that goes back to the human aspect as well. I mean, if we're looking at general human behavior,
Yeah.
we had all the information in the world to look at, and we'll probably look at 5 websites.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So with all the capability in the world, with amazing, super powerful artificial intelligence, we'll probably display the same human characteristics.
Yeah, it's not gonna change substantially, or it might, I think, based on.
Well, as you said, the uptick in porn, which was the thing
Yeah.
that really drove the internet, and cats riding bicycles, and social media slop.
Yeah, absolutely. And one could even say that that it's going to be one website. I think that's what the AI companies want. That's the strategy that they have for the near future, to be the portal of the internet.
Well, it's that layer, monetizing the layer on top, which is very undemocratic. It's almost taking access to information. It's de-interneting the internet. And even now, if you Google something, you probably find Reddit posts and ads.
Yeah, I think it's a further consolidation of where we have gone since the early 2000s, I would say, with the platform economies, as we call them, right? I mean, most people, when they understand the internet, they think of Google, and that means YouTube. That means Gmail as well, so the emails they use. They think of Microsoft Teams, maybe Outlook if they use a different server, and they think of Meta, which is Instagram and Facebook or WhatsApp. That's the average experience people have. Even when they use a website via Google, it's still on that same platform. So it's like, but there's a whole different layer. And so with AI, it's kind of like, it might still be different platforms, or it might just be one. So that's why I think the investment is also, for a lot of these firms, is so important as well, because the first firm who can build that interface, the portal to everything online, with a bridge to physical as well, that's going to be the one that dominates the future of the economy, no questions asked.
Yeah, I mean, George Colony at Forrester, I've heard him say it before. Zach Cass last week said a similar thing. The interface with technology, the interface with information, the idea of it being all on a screen, we will interact differently.
Yeah.
Specifically what and how. And if you look at all the elements that we've discussed today, you could probably begin to string together a bit of an idea of what could be coming, in the sense that we probably won't trust things that we can't literally see. Robotics, how people are interacting, why they're interacting with them, the speed at which everything is moving, how it's going to affect or not affect jobs, and ultimately how we take control as human beings, self-responsibility, and how we leverage AI.
Yeah.
It really ultimately comes back down to personal choice, doesn't it?
To a degree, I think a lot of it will come down also on the kinds of hardware that we use, because today we have still, to an extent at least, a strict distinction between physical and digital. If we had humanoids, we could still say that there is a distinction between physical and digital. What we say to a humanoid will undoubtedly be used and necessary probably as well for the model. So it still gets uploaded in whatever model that humanoid is based on. I think there's various guesses that people have been made on what the next big hardware product is. And in part of that, it's very interesting for VCs as well from an investment perspective, because there's been very little investment in hardware, especially in the past years, because since the iPhone, and obviously there's like Samsung, Xiaomi, and those others that are still, but
Pretty much the same, aren't they?
yeah, it's undisputed that what the main tool is. If I were to make a guess, and it's probably will take me a long time to lay out all the evidence now of what the next step could be in hardware, it would probably be smart glasses and augmented reality glasses. I'm not a believer in, for now at least, on we're going to be locked in the virtual reality space. I think that's a whole different ball game. But I think a very logical next step could be augmented reality. And you would see the use cases as well, right? Like if I have to calculate to go somewhere, instead of looking at my phone, it just points me in the directions. But that means as well that the integration of AI generated content with what I see out in the street is matched. And then we really see the boundary between digital or synthetic, is probably the right way, between synthetic and physical blur. And that meshes us really together with technology as it will stand.
Augmented AI-driven human experience.
Yeah, like imagine instead of speaking to your AI companion on your phone, where you just see a voice, you see it in front of you, maybe looking nice.
Here's the last question for you.
Yeah.
Then. And this, for some reason, I was thinking about this on the weekend, and it was to do with someone who had said people seem to have lost the ability to think critically, and if you did want to discuss, I mean, we've discussed a lot of ideas. A lot of things I wouldn't have thought of, and through discussion, I think it's just really important to hear things out loud and to be challenged, especially to be challenged, and to hear perspectives you wouldn't otherwise hear. So imagine a version of yourself, because we always look in the image of other people, but you're in control of your own data. But imagine there's a version of you that you can speak to, so it becomes more like a conscience. So you can trust it because you're in control of it, but that you could plug in knowledge modules, so it can be an enhanced version of you that could communicate in a way that you understand, and can understand how you absorb information. And probably the best person in the world for you to communicate with from a comprehension standpoint is in fact not someone else, it is yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're in control of your augmented you, then actually it could become an extension of your critical thinking.
Absolutely. Also with a new knowledge base of things and new abilities and capabilities and capacities that I don't have yet. Let me put it this way. If I was born 1,000 years ago and I would have had to spend 5 days outside in the wild, I probably would have died at day 3 because I wouldn't know how to find water sources. I certainly don't know how to hunt. I might find some berries, but they might have poison, and that then you have the same result. But if you would have asked my version from 1,000 years ago how to do that, hopefully, I would have been able to, because I had survival skills. Maybe a few hundred years later, I would have been able to read a map and navigate my way through the landscapes and understand where to find water, how I get from one city to another. Today, we use Google Maps, and I look it up, and I have a relatively good sense of orientation, so I can memorize these things. But the example I'm trying to make is that we outsource a lot of skills and a lot of capabilities for things that we no longer need to remember ourselves. So I don't need to remember all phone numbers of all my friends because I memorize it on my phone or in a phone book if I'm old school, and I write them down but that's more because I take joy in writing them down, not because I have to. And looking into the future, I think there is probably, and I think that's the real discomfort, to be able to say, I think there is some parts of our thinking that we can actually not think about that much, that we can outsource. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of trust. And that comes with concentrations of power of who holds that data and those knowledge. But that means that for future me, to bring it back to that point, there is inevitably going to be some skills that I think I will deeply envy future Walter to have in the future. But that maybe future Walter will be like, why you're capable of doing these things? Why do you even need that? And I hope it's going to be things that I don't care about too much today, or things that bother me or that are repetitive, not the things that make me as a person and that I care about and how other people know me.
Well, we've certainly got an interesting future ahead. Walter, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Graham.